All right, so we'll start off. We'll wait a few minutes to get really going heavily into this, but as I said the other day, is typically we start off with a little bit of reflections and just get any thoughts, any ideas since our last session. Did you guys think about this? Didn't think about it, so do want to hear from everyone. So let's start with Kevin today.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. As I mentioned in the last meeting, we're right on the tail end of a pretty big project, the biggest project that we've had since I've been at this company. And so as we've been doing that, we've been going along, and I took my notes from the first class, and I actually met with a couple of our vendors to make sure that we had kind of ticked all the boxes. Mm-hmm. We went over our scopes of work, and I used some of the outlines that were mentioned in the lecture to ensure that we had met all those things. And then when we did find discrepancies, I was able to talk with the vendors and figure out, how we could reinstigate those missing scope pieces back into the project and still get done on time.
Good. I'm glad this is already helping out.
It is.
Good. Let's see, who's next? Joey.
So on my end, I've just learned to make sure the design phase of the project is taken into consideration a lot more than we typically do. Like I said, in the past, we just go straight into a project and it's a great idea, let's go ahead and do it. And then we find hiccups in the middle, so we have change orders. And we're trying to avoid that with the bigger projects moving forward. I mean, we've got a huge project coming up, and this is going to be key information we're going to learn here to avoid all those.
Good. Yeah, definitely. And we will talk, it'll be towards the end, about change control and managing changes and avoiding change orders. And whatever change orders that you do have, that they are legitimate and not just changes because just somebody wants to make the change without understanding the implication. Good. Krista.
Good morning. I have been thinking about it. Our fiscal year starts September 1st, and so I've got a couple initiatives on my plate and trying to use the information from Tuesday session to change up my projects a little bit, and also from a more like reflection piece. I liked the 80% of time should be spent planning. I think it kind of gives me a little bit more permission to think more than like constantly having to act, as I think some of our culture here is. So that's it.
Okay. I'll give you more fuel for that fire here. Some ammunition that you can use. I've got a chart. I'm going to show you what happens when you don't plan versus when you do plan. And so from a cost perspective. Good. Brad.
Yeah, so good first session. I think the takeaway or the main thing that I resonated with me was Carrier Family Farms must have a lot of projects going on to have all these teammates of mine in this seminar. So this must be very relevant.
Good.
Which we actually do have a lot of projects that are either just scoped out and they're in the scope out or and development phase or are just starting. So this is very relevant for us. I said at the last session, a lot of these concepts and policies and procedures are just great things to learn as a manager and as a leader of people, projects, and being responsible for allocating capital, human, resource capital, cash capital, and spending money as being good stewards and responsible managers of the company.
Good. We're going to get closer to the finance part here next week. Yeah, next week we'll get into the financial piece of a project, the costing and budgeting. So, see, Eric. Are you on? Can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back. So, Darius. Darius, can you hear us? Ralph?
I'm here. I think my co-workers are playing hooky on the. So what I figured, what I learned, is structure. My last project that we ran, it was just kind of shooting off the hip and just running kind of wild, and we've missed a lot of. We had to redo quite a bit of work over and over again. So I think the structure is going to help us stay streamlined and get it done the first time.
Yeah, and that's the key. Even after you do projects, the importance of closing out a project and doing lessons learned is that take that information to the next project so you can avoid some of the same issues, and so you avoid redoing work as you're going through a new project.
We've closed projects out, and we've gone back, and there's still a lot of stuff that's not completed, so it's not actually closed.
Yeah, we call those the 98%ers, completers, right? So
Yeah.
98% complete, but there's still that 2% that lingers on for long periods of time.
Yeah, we're going to come back and get to that, and it hasn't done.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Hey, Jess, we're good. We had to unmute the phone.
Okay, so you're good now. All right. So how about you? What Darius, any thoughts?
Yeah, Ralph and I have actually worked on a couple of the same projects so far. So yeah, it's kind of the same observations from past projects. It's significantly different here, the way we do projects, as opposed to where I've been in the past. I was a field supervisor actually for a contractor before, and the having to structure things differently when you're it, basically. So here we're the engineers, we're the contractors actually doing the work. The project management is all in-house for the most part. We do use contractors occasionally, but I would say 90% of our projects we do in-house with the maintenance team. So it's kind of a different thing to actually have to go from inception to completion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So based on some of the stuff we saw in the last class, going back and applying it to other projects we've done, the theory behind it all makes sense, and you can see how, had we followed those steps on all those projects, how the outcome could have been different. The timelines, the overall costs, redos, changes, all those kind of things definitely could have been, at least for the very most part, avoided.
Absolutely. And we're going to learn some more about that as we go through, then especially what we're going to start today when we get to the work breakdown structure and how important that is to better understand all the work that needs to be done. Good. So let's see. Jamie.
Morning all. So I think for me, I mentioned in our last session that kind of an aha for me was how much planning goes into the beginning part of the process in order to make it successful. And at first that was kind of like, oh, well, decisions are made above me. I don't have to do the planning. Yay, I'm off the hook. But then in reflection to that, And then in conjunction with some other projects that we're working on, I realized there's actually a lot I can do to support those decisions that are being made, to inform them. And so as a team member, as opposed to a decision maker, I'm seeing the role that I can play to support the decision making.
Good. Good. How about Julie? She drop off? Oh, there she is.
Hello.
Hello.
I think my favorite part of our last session, I like visual images, so I really appreciated the slide that showed the circles of overlap that demonstrated area of knowledge and practice, project management, and then general management. I thought those were really good to kind of visualize that there's a difference. So that was a kind of an aha moment for me from last time that I appreciated.
Good. Yeah, we'll try to do as many visuals, but again, as adults, we learn better by seeing pictures and doing. So that's why the next few days, you guys are gonna be doing a lot of work. So we're gonna have some fun. I see we just added our 2 folks that were trying to get in. So Susie, are you on? Susie?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay. And Josh, are you on? Okay. Susie, do you want to go ahead and what we're doing is going around and doing a reflection. So any thoughts since Monday? Any ahas?
Well, I've been thinking how on what was it, Tuesday, Monday?
Monday.
When
Tuesday.
Monday.
Sorry, it was Tuesday. It was Tuesday.
So I think one of the biggest thing is we forget about communication, and just that detail right there, communication among everybody, even the smallest, detail, just communicating about it can make a big difference in being efficient and cost effective and everything. So sometimes I feel we forget to communicate, and I can say that here in our company, sometimes I feel like we forget to communicate, and I think just reiterating that through here and anywhere, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. And we will talk about more. In fact, today you're going to get some experience on what we normally call report outs, which is an easy way to constantly be communicating to all parties. And so we'll start physically doing that today. And so that is one way to make sure everyone understands where are you on the project. Okay, let me see who's next. Who haven't we done? Did Ralph? Eric?
Yeah. What I got off of last week is step-by-step organizing, how I can eliminate a lot of the stuff that doesn't get done.
Okay.
On the project. So like ordering supplies and stuff like that, having the supplies here on time, which I do a lot of. So communicating. So yeah,
okay.
That's what I got out of the last meeting.
Okay, all right, good. Luke?
Yeah, I think not really any new ahas, but just more reflection on, for us, being that we're a younger company and we've only been around for 5 years, basically. So a lot of people we're hiring are, newer or just younger in their careers, maybe they've been out of school for a few years. The part that I really kind of took away and thought about some more over the last few days was really the getting people to buy into the initiate part and really the planning stage before the project even starts. A lot of people come in with an idea for a project or something to do to improve the way, we're running part of the function or part of the business, and they won't have the front end loaded with the, who, what, why, how, all the details. So that was really stuff that I'm looking forward to implementing with the rest of the people in our business, is that making sure they do all that work up front before we even actually start the project, so that we get it done appropriately. So.
Okay. Good. Good. Let's see who we have left. Rolando?
Yeah, it's just nothing new. Just here with what I got is communication, pretty much. I think that's what we need to practice here at Sun West Milling.
Okay.
And I think this class is going to teach us a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay. I think the only one we have left is Josh. Can you hear us? Oh, Bill, sorry. Forgot about Bill. Last but not least, well, we still have Josh. Bill, go ahead.
So I have, I was really taken by one of the slides. We have a big project coming, and I was presenting it to the shareholders for kind of the very beginning stages, want to get in their approval, not having surprises. And I wrote an 8-page description of the project. And then I think the aha moment was when one of the slides, the project brief slide, I said, I don't think they're going to read 8 pages. So I wrote a 1-page project brief, and it's much more direct and to the point. And from the takeaway that I could see from the meeting, that's all they read. So,
and that's usually what happens. And so less is more, right? It's versus the other way around. And in today's world, if you can't grab somebody's attention in the first 15 seconds, you lose them at that point. So yeah, you want to keep it as short as possible and to the point. And we're going to get some practice today. So I'm glad you actually used that, but we're going to get some practice on that today with whatever project the teams decide to go with. But you're absolutely right. You got to keep it short and to the point.
Okay.
Good. Josh, last but not least.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is quick reflection on any thoughts from Tuesday's session.
Yeah, it was kind of neat, kind of going off what Bill just said. It was neat to see him using the slides to kind of guide how he wrote that portion for what we're about to do. It was just nice to kind of have a guide of, okay, here's what the next step should be and what each one of those should include in it. So it was really neat to see it used in real life rather than just through a training online.
Yep. Absolutely. Good. Good. So while we've been talking, I've been redefining the team. So we're going to have 4 teams today, and these folks will be your team going forward. So just so you know what teams to think going forward, because we'll start that in a few minutes. But Bill, Brad, Chewy, and Guy, you're team 1. Remember that, team 1. Jamie, Julie, Krista, Luke, and Mike, team 2. And I have JJ, Kevin, Susie, and Josh, your team 3. And then Darius, Eric, Ralph, and Rolando, your team 4. Did I miss anybody?
No, but I'd like to be traded, please.
You want to be swapped? Yeah, well, we can move, let's do this. Let's
I'm
move
just
Susie.
kidding. No, serious. I'm just kidding, Jess.
I can move you. That's not a problem. Since we have two financial people, I can swap you with Susie. So, but that's where you guys are set up right now. That group will be, that team is a team that you will be assigned for the rest of the class. And so when we break out into breakout rooms, into sub teams, that's who you will be working for. By the way, that's why I put Guy in there, because I know I always got to have a referee between the CEO and the CFO. So that's why Guy's in there. All right, so you guys know that's your team going forward. So let's jump into, before we do anything else, I need, for Kate, I need everybody to go into the chat and your name and company, please. If you could type in your name and your company, and then she's going to take that for the roll call for today.
Jess, could you also post your cell number if anybody drops out and needs to get back in so they don't sit in the waiting room?
Okay, I just sent my cell number, and some of you already called me this morning, so at least some of you kept my number, which is good. Okay, so we're going to start sharing. We're going to start with the presentation. And like I said, we're going to start breaking out probably in the next 30, 40 minutes. Let me see. Everybody see the screen? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, so. All right, any questions on the last section that we covered? Did you all get the link to the videos? Okay, good. So if you have any questions, you can go back to that. And the same thing, we're going to do the same thing. These videos are a little large, so it takes me a few hours to get them compiled and then uploaded. So you'll get either at the end of today or no later than Monday morning, but hopefully before the end of today, you get the link to today's session. So no questions, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic. Now we're moving into planning. Remember our 5 phases, and we're moving into planning. So one of the first things I want to talk about to keep in mind as we go through this is I want to show you this graph. And so if you read this graph, this is cost trends and influences. So this dark blue line here is the ability to control costs by stakeholders or project management or the project team. This line down here is actually incurred cost. So you can see that they end up crossing way downstream in the project, which means if you want to bring this end down of cost down, what you have to do is raise this line up. In other words, you need to spend more time up front planning to bring this back end down, because here's the amount of influence, right? If you look at the line here, this is the amount of influence you're really going to have at the end once you cross over. Now, that could be once you're into the project and actually doing the work. At that point, the amount of influence you have on actual costs is very, very small. The largest opportunity to control costs is at the beginning of any project. So keep that in mind when you look at the life cycle of the project. So if we move now to the next screen, right? And if you overlay that curve, if you don't spend much time here in the planning, it's going to cost you over here. Okay? And if we want to control the cost over here, bring that down, we've got to do good planning. Now here's the reality. No plan is ever perfect. Okay? Things are going to deviate, but it's easier to get on track when you know you had a plan instead of starting to reinvent the wheel every time something comes up. So again, from a cost perspective and a control perspective, if you plan, you'll have better control of the project during the execution phase. So now we're going to spend really the next 3 sessions, spend most of our time in the planning phase. Again,
one thing I'm gonna add, Jess. If your project is customer facing, meaning the customer is involved in the project or a deliverable out of the project is going to the customer, when those lines cross, the customer is starting to see the impact of what's actually happening on the project. So your ability to control costs overlap into your customer side of it, and they're starting to see the cost impact as well. So keep in mind, some projects are internal to the business, but others actually are customer facing.
I think most of you that are here are all internal, right? It may be Luke, with the exception of Luke.
Yeah, I do a lot of customer facing stuff as well. So.
Okay, so yeah. So what we're going to focus on is creating a workable approach to accomplishing a project. And the key word is workable, right? Because you can easily create plans that are unrealistic. These have to be workable. Our focus is to develop a plan that we're going to go execute and that we're going to follow. And as part of the planning is now clearly, one of the things we're going to do is clearly define the project team. We're not defining the resources, necessarily the resources. These folks may be resources for the project, but we need to identify who needs to be on the team. If you remember, going back to the 3 bubbles, right? We talked about there's got to be somebody who has a knowledge of project management, an individual or individuals to understand the business management side, and an individual or individuals to understand the application side. So when we start thinking about who should be on this team, we got to be thinking about that chart and thinking about having that balance on that team. Because what the primary output, we talked about the brief. And the brief, it is at a high level. It's typically done at the initial. And everything we're going to now be doing is actually developing the detailed project management plan. And this is all the way down to the task level of the work that's going to be performed. So now we're going to be identifying all the work that needs to be performed. And then we'll talk about to what level is reasonable when we talk about how low do we want to get as far as tasks. Do we want to get into work packages? We'll talk about the hierarchy of the different levels and where you should be for most of your planning. So this detailed project plan, now we're going to shift from the scope, and the scope basically gives us the boundaries. Now we're going to talk about a statement of work. And the statement of work now, and we're going to get into detailed statement of work now, but the statement of work is now defining what is included in the project, and just, if not more important, what is not included in the project. So the scopes set our boundaries, right? This is kind of the starting, this is the end, this is our boundary, and now we're going to start defining what is and what is not included to ensure that everyone understands what this project entails. Now, obviously, if you have a very large project, if going back to the project that I was working on at the ones I was working on at Siemens, they were very long, multi-year, but we had early on defined it at a very high level, what was included, what was not included. And then we started to put them in the categories or buckets when things came up to see if they were included or not included. So we're now going to define the what. What is the statement of work? What is it that we are going to deliver, and what is it that we're not going to deliver? How are we going to do this, right? Which is now defining the actual task, defining the work. The tool that we use to define the work is called a work breakdown structure, WBS, referred to as a WBS. And we're going to be spending a lot of time on this. When is the tool for the when is the schedule. Okay, often we confuse, especially in this modern world, with software. Software, if you buy a Microsoft project software, it doesn't go to the how, it goes to the when. You go straight into creating the schedule versus defining the work that needs to be done. And the idea is that you do both at the same time. The challenge with that, and what I have found over the years, and what we have found over the years going to our clients, is when they start working on the schedule, everyone's focused on the making a beautiful waterfall schedule, and they're not really looking at the actual work that needs to be done. And so the traditional way of project management is to define the work first and then create the schedule. So, but the tool there is a project schedule. Typically, it's a Gantt chart, and for each one of these, we're going to talk through and actually create one manually. But again, it's to help you understand what the software is doing for you when you're using software. And then the how much is the budget. We're going to show you, as part of what we're going to do is by defining the work breakdown structure, it's going to be easier to define what your budget is from a labor cost and from a material cost. Once you know what work has to be performed, you can start assigning labor hours, people hours, I should say, to the work breakdown structure. And once you create the schedule, that's actually going to now create, when you create horizontal. So just to give you an idea, a work breakdown structure is vertical, schedule is horizontal. And so what you're going to get from a budget perspective, from a cost perspective, is when you do it by work breakdown structure, that is looking vertically by different categories of the project, what that's going to cost. And then horizontally, it's going to give you when you're going to consume that cost. And that's on the schedule. And then the who, the responsibility assignments, right? Who's responsible? Now, here we talk about, when we say the who is responsible to make sure the work gets done? In the work breakdown structure, we are going to identify the resources required to complete each of the individual tasks, or down to the work package, if we get down to that level. But one of the key things is identifying who's responsible to make sure the work gets done. Now, we know that the project manager is ultimately responsible for the entire project, for the time and the budget. But the reality, again, is the project manager can't be everywhere and they can't do everything. So part of having a project team is assigning those team members responsibility to ensure things get done within their sphere of influence.
Hey, Jess.
Yep.
What's a good amount of team members for a project team?
It really depends. It really depends on the size of the project and the complexity of the project. Yeah, it really does. Here's the thing. As I said the other day, the minimum should be 2, but project teams can be very large and very complex. Now, on the high end, the projects I was responsible, and because we had a component that was R&D and development, I mean, my project team was spread out across most of Europe, part of Asia, and I had probably somewhere in the vicinity like 40 team members on my project team as a project manager, not as a director, as a project manager. And so it really just depends. It could be as like I said, as small as a minimum 2 people.
Yeah, because that's pretty much me as a new project manager. I come up with a layout, and then they hand it off to Darius, and then that's pretty much our team. And then he hands it off to his guys.
and that's fine for the type of work, for the type of project that you're doing. That may be fine. But if you're doing a larger, let's say that you're completely upgrading your mill, right? That's a much larger project, which is going to require more people. May require having some external people be involved. And so it just really depends on the size and the complexity of the project.
And what's a good, I guess, a percentage of on time? Because I always cut it close to the finish line. Like I don't give them any leeway.
So here's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because we are going to talk about when we get to schedule. We'll talk more about it when we get to schedule. You have to define, you as a team, when you start, need to define what is an on-time delivery. Remember what I said on Tuesday in regards to one of the things we're going to have to do is define measurements, performance measurements. And part of defining the performance measurements is the definition of on-time completion, right? Is on-time completion exactly the date that we put on the schedule? Is it 3 days ahead? Is it 2 days after? That's considered on time. You need to define how you're measuring on time. You're also going to have to define, when we start talking about, again, when we get into the schedule piece, the horizontal piece, is defining milestones. What's on time completion for milestones? Is it the exact date? Is it 2 days early? Is it 1 day late? You have to define what is acceptable to you and to the team and to your organization.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about it, because we're going to have, I'll show you that we have what's called a data dictionary and a parking lot, that these things need to go on there so everybody's crystal clear of what is an acceptable. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what happened to me on my first project. My first project at Siemens, I was working on the extension, the west side extension of the light rail system in Portland. And so if anybody's been to Portland, the west side extension goes out to Hillsborough on the west side. And on my understanding now, they've expanded it even beyond that. But which means there was a 3-mile tunnel that had to be constructed to reach Hillsborough, which was on the other side of the hill there from downtown Portland. And so that tunnel is 3 miles long. And so the research that was done earlier, the geologists determined that the east side of the entrance to the tunnel was made up of hard rock, and that the west side of the entrance of the tunnel was soft material, soft soil. So the decision was made from an engineering perspective was, okay, we have to blast through the hard rock and we can bore through the soft material. And so that was the plan. And so we started doing that. We didn't get too far on the soft side before we ran into very hard rock. And apparently the geologists were wrong. And so here we are, we created this bore machine, was all built and designed, started to bore, ran into hard rock. Boring machines are not designed to take hard rock on. And so at that point, we had to make a change and we had to start blasting. That delayed the entire project by more than a year. Okay, because blasting is because of limitations of where we're putting what was put on us, that we could only blast between 3 a.m. in the morning and 9 a.m. in the morning. And so again, with those limitations, that delayed the whole project by, I think it was like 14 months. And so those things happened, right? It wasn't on our performance plan. It wasn't on it. Those things will happen. But the intent is you have a plan. Now, all the other things that we planned to do, we went ahead and did. And basically we ended up doing is just waiting for the tunnel to be completed and just completed the last 3 miles of the connection between the two. But understand that these things happened. And so just be advised that you need to have these KPIs from a performance perspective. When things like that happen, then you have to adjust and establish new performance guidelines for the project. Now, overall, the tunnel was 14 months. Actually, the tunnel was almost 2 years late. But overall, from a project, we were only 14 14 months late. Now, interesting enough, the day we opened up, the politicians, of course, said it was done on time and under budget. And I was standing back there with the other teammates, the other folks that were on the team, and just shaking our heads as if we were late by, 14 months. But yet the politician said, it was a big thing. We had Clinton out, and we had all these politicians talk about how great the project was. But those things happened, right? But just understand that you got to have those performance measurements in there.
Okay. Yeah, because I think a lot of the projects that we've been doing, it's all right. We got this week. Let's go ahead and start it. And so we don't spend enough time planning for the projects.
Yep.
But we do put in we do meet for a budget, which makes no sense why we wouldn't meet for planning and get a start date. Usually it's we get about a week or two to start a project and plan it and get it started.
Yeah, and so there's the other thing. We have a client out in Wisconsin that they do a lot of retrofits for paper mills. And they have certain periods, they have shutdowns and they have to rush. They do a lot of their planning ahead of time. So not knowing exactly what dates, they just know more or less what month it happens. And so they do all their planning, they do all their prep work ahead of time. So once they get the green light, usually they have a very short period of time to do the modifications to those facilities and the upgrades. And so again, you just have to plan and just wait for the trigger to actually go and execute.
Okay, sounds good.
Good. So here are some components. The team needs to understand what are the objectives. There's the scope. Now we take that next level of the scope. We start with the scope and start defining the statement of work. We have now create milestones, task. What are the tasks get down, which is now defining our work breakdown structure. What people, more importantly, we'll talk about the importance. It's not the individuals that we're looking for. It's the skills we need in order to complete the task. Assigning responsibilities. Defining the schedule. Defining a budget. Project controls. Where are the project controls? Project controls should be tied to milestones. Again, we talked last time, risk management. What are the risks and what are the mitigations we're going to have in place? Here we're talking people. Other resources can be equipment, external resources. What other things do we need? And we need a good communication plan. Okay, and this is all part of the overall project management, the detailed plan on what you're going to do on the project. And again, it doesn't require that you write a book, okay, because you'll see really what you have is again, we're going to run through the exercise, is you take the project brief and you now take it to the next level of detail. The documents, and I will send you at the end of this, you're going to get a bunch of different documents that you can use and modify however you want. Typically, since we believe in the lean thinking, is you should have all of this with the exception of the schedule and the work breakdown structure and the budget. Most of this should fit on 11 by 17, or what we call an A3. And so 11 by 17 documents, really all you need, all of this. And I will send you that. That's often referred to as a project canvas, but the reality is it is an A3 just converted into a canvas. But again, at the end of the session, you'll get all those sample documents that you can use. So the first thing we got to do is make sure that the project aligns with the objectives of the business, that we're not running off and working on a project that doesn't align with the business. So for objectives, we use the definition of the SMART method. So the SMART method consists of coming up with very specific statements of our goal. M means it needs to be measurable, right? This is where we talk about the importance, just like I said earlier, KPIs, key performance indicators, this is where you start delivering. What are the metrics? How are we going to measure our project? How are we going to measure that we're doing the right thing? The goals that we establish in our schedule have to be attainable, which again, have to be realistic, because it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we're going to get done in 2 weeks without really doing any detailed planning. And you might get it done, but it might have cost you 3 times as much. It has to be realistic. Okay? The goal must be relevant to the project, and it has to be realistic. And it has to be timely. There's a deadline, and we will talk about the importance that the end date should never change. Everything upstream from that, you need to find ways to get it done or adjust or move, but the end date should rarely ever change. Now, in the case of what happened to us in Portland, there was absolutely no way that we can make up that time. I mean, it was the last thing that was completed on the project. It was the first thing that started and it was the last thing they completed. And there really was no safe way, no other way to make sure that that tunnel was completed as safely as possible. So some other key things you need to, from an objective, when you look at your objectives, you need to look at why. What's the advantage of this project? What's the advantage of getting this completed in the time that we need to get it completed in? So why are we doing this? Why are we doing this project? And then we need to look at, okay, what is the work that needs to be done? Now, the work breakdown structure is going to help you define what work needs to be done. And so you have an understanding of what work needs to be achieved. Then we start looking at, when does it have to happen? When does this work have to happen in order to achieve the date or the deadline? And then we also need to look at, where does this work need to take place? Because we need to understand that, especially when we're creating the what is the work that we need to do? We also need to understand, where's that work taking place? Is that taking place in the shop? Is it being taken place on the line? Is it being taken place outside, third party? Where's the work taking place? Once you have an idea of where the work is taking place, then who needs to be involved? And so where the work takes place often impacts who needs to be involved. And then that ties back to the when. And then we can start talking about which resources have constraints on them. Because once we start identifying the who, we may have a unique who. And there may be some heavy constraints on that resource. Or it could be equipment. Okay? Limited resources on the equipment side. So we need to understand all of these when we look at the objectives. Have we looked at these pieces? So when we look at the scope of work, what we're doing is, the scope of work is typically at a high level, 50 words or less. My preference is to use basically one-liners that say, here's the data, here's the information, okay? And it's a common vision, so you want to keep it less than 50 words. Usually you should include the who, what, why, and when, and some cost targets. Couple of things when you look at your scope. The folks, again, and we said this earlier, folks that are going to be involved and are going to be performing the work need to be involved in helping develop the key objectives for the project. And they have to be involved in identifying potential risks. Now, I'm going to give you when we do our first exercise, I'm going to give you an easy way to identify the very first risks associated with any project. And so, but then you need to become a little more logical, and you should have a document. And again, you'll get an example, and it's typically a spreadsheet, a risk log. And with the exercise we start today, you're basically going to have that in the form that we use. We try to keep things simple. If you try to do anything complex, people just don't use them. So a lot of the things that we'll be offering you and presenting to you, really simple things that you can use. You can post on walls. You can post. You can even post electronically. The PMI methodology, the project Project Management Institute, they have very elaborate risk tables and calculations that you can use. But from a practical perspective, if you keep things simple and just remember where your first potential risks come from, and you focus on those, that has you covered at least 70 to 80% of the time with the risk. So now going through and defining a statement of work. And the statement of work, again, is now we're defining what is it that we want to do, but more importantly, we now need to have an understanding of what is included. What deliverables are we going to deliver? And even more important, in my opinion, is identifying what is not included. Because when you do that sit-down review with either your customer or your sponsor, and you have a list of things that you as a project manager understand, here are the things that we're going to deliver in this project. And again, going back to the example, we want to increase our productivity by 50%. Now you list out, okay, here are the things that are included to get in this project that's going to get us to that 50% improvement. But here are the things, more importantly, here are the things that are not included, because your sponsor might be thinking that you're going to do those things that are not included. And you need to get that agreement early on before you actually run off and do any real work, and then find out that that's not what the intention was. And so part of this is this constant going back and meeting with either your customer, if you're facing out to the external world, or your sponsor, if it's an internal project, right? This constant communication, because this is how you reach agreement. That way you're not redoing work when you're doing work or doing rework at the end because it wasn't exactly what was envisioned or expected. All right, so now we're actually going to do our exercise. So before we do our exercise, I want to walk you through a couple of things. So each team is going to meet in a breakout room. And then the very first thing you need to do is part that I asked all of you to come with was with a potential project in mind. The parameters for that project, basically anything that could be done reasonably short, 9 months, kind of the longest, not complex, but hopefully something real. So the team will identify the project. Then you're going to select the name of the project. You're going to, from the team, you're going to identify and assign a project manager. You need to identify a person who's going to do the scribing. The scriber is someone who's going to be writing things on your board. And then you will need to start answering the questions. And the questions in there in the brief are: who is the sponsor, who's the end user, what is the scope, what is included, what is not included, identify the completion date or the due date. And at the very least, if you have a budget, even if it's a pretend budget, I want you to come up with a pretend budget, throw it in there. If you don't have a pretend budget, at least come up with a labor rate that we can then use when we create the work breakdown structure that will help you generate your budget. And so that is at the very least. Ideally, if you have a budget, a number, throw it in there, even if it's a wild guess. And then we'll compare when we actually break down the project, we'll do a comparison, okay? So let me show you. So let me now switch over to Miro and show you where you're going to do the work. Do you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so within Miro, This is the project brief you need to fill out. What I'd like you to do is use Post-it notes. I'm going to show you an example. Do you see the new screen? Okay.
Yep.
So what I'd like you to do is just use Post-its to fill in and answer the questions. Now, your boards basically take a Post-it. If you remember Post-its, how to do that, come over, drop it in, right? Shrink it into size, make it fit, and just type in there the project name. You're going to do it for each one of these. And again, you can zoom in and you can make the Post-its. Okay, so you're going to answer project name, project scope. Again, in the so project scope, just the boundaries, who the project manager, due date. So here's what I want you to do. Start date of any project is September 7th. Okay, so from that point on, if you say it's going to 6 months, so from that point on, pick a date 6 months from September 7th. Statement of work basically just lists the things that are included and the things that are not included. And then I would like you to identify who all is on your team. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then what I want you to do is there's a board here that says assumptions for brief. List the assumptions you're making on the brief. If you're making assumptions about the date, if you're making assumptions about your budget, whatever they are, list them out here. One assumption per Post-it. So here's the trick. Here's the easy answer to your risk. Your first risk is what? Your first assumptions, right? So again, 7 or 8 out of 10 times, your first assumptions are usually your high risk because they are assumptions, right? It's a risk associated with that assumption. We often forget that. And so you list your assumptions here, and then you can list those as your risk, which is right next to it. And again, you can list the Post-it. And then what I'd like you to do is list them in order of importance to you. In other words, at the top is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can put number 1, number 2, or number 3, 4, 5 on the Post-it. Over here, you're just listing the assumptions and then rank them from 1 being the most important to however many you have. Okay. Now, I also want to show you some more. So overall, each team has a large working space that looks like this. Right now, we're working on the first step, which is going to be your brief. This board here that says Team WBS, this is where you're going to create your work breakdown structure. Down here are going to be the assumptions and the risk associated once you're working. What's going to happen is as you continue to work through the project steps, these are going to change. So I'd like you to list the assumptions, then the risk. So we're going to spend a few sessions working on your work breakdown structure. And then when we go to create, I've already created a table here for you to place your Post-its once or over to create the schedule. And this goes out, there are 30 periods, I think is what I have, 30 weeks here, which is roughly 8.5 months. So hopefully your project is less than that. If not, we can certainly add to that. And the same thing, what assumptions are we making when we're putting the schedule together? What's the risk associated with the schedule? Okay, so these are your work tables. Now let me zoom all the way out. Every team has a table. Team 1, you should be working with the one that says Team 1. These other areas are blacked out because I don't want you guys going in there yet until you complete this. And then I'll remove this, and when we start working later today on the work breakdown structure, then you'll be able to get in there. And then there'll be a couple of sessions before we get into schedule. So Team 1, Team 1, Team 2, Team 3, Team 4. Team 1 is blue, Team 2 is yellow, Team 3 is orange, Team 4 is orange. I mean, green, sorry, green. So when you go, so when you go to your breakout room, make sure you go. I'm going to send you the link to this. I haven't sent you the link to this yet. I'm going to send you the link in the chat. I will send you the link. Then go to your team numbers. Go to the color that you should be working on, and that will be your board. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to go through, and I will be dropping in. So I'm going to give you, so the process works like this. I'm going to give you 35 minutes to populate those boards. I will be dropping in during those 35 minutes. We'll be dropping in to the different groups, checking in on you. At the end of the 35 minutes, you're going to be brought back all together. And if you guys need more time at that point, I can send you back for another short period of time for you to complete those. And then what we're going to do is each team, whoever the project manager, designated project manager is, will then report out. And the report out consists, in this case, basically going down the project brief and explaining your project. The other project teams, I'm going to encourage you to ask questions, challenge the team if you need to, ask them about their project. But going forward, at the end of every one of these, you're going to have what's called a report out. And the report out is, in this case, is going over the project brief. But typically we cover very basic thing. What did we just do? What are the issues that we're discovering? And what's the next steps? It's that simple. Doesn't have to be complicated. So here you go through the brief, tell us about the assumptions you made, and tell us about the risk. Now, there are I have two other boards here for all of you. And you will use these boards, data dictionary. So the definition of data dictionary, this is where you, as a team, will define terminology. Let me give you an example. One of the most confusing words out there is the word budget, because budget means different things to different people. So when you talk to somebody in the sales function, someone that's facing the customer, a budget is often what they give a customer is a budget, which is a price budget. But when you talk to someone internally, you hear the word budget, that's more of what you're giving me, how much money you're giving me to work on. So you got to be clear on what the definition is of budget. Now, if that means breaking out external budget, management budget, project budget, that's when we have to break that down. But if you just leave it at budget, you can sit in a meeting and people will walk away with a different interpretation of what that is, because the budget is, in many cases, I would suspect, Brad, for you, budget's in dollars for the most part. I would suspect maybe for you, Chewy, you're now looking at hours, right? So that word budget is defined different ways. And so you got to have clear definition of what that word is. Now, I'll give you that example because every time we go to any organization and you have these different people sitting in the room, we talk about budget and everybody's really talking about something different. And so This is why the team needs to be crystal clear of what word you're using and what is the definition of that word. That's what this is for. This is where you will put in your post-it note that says budget equals project budget. Okay, fine, so be it. And then you may have an hour budget, labor hours budget, right? But now you're defining labor hours. So again, use the data dictionary for that. The other tool is the parking lot right next to it. So as you're going through this and you identify things that are outside the work that you're doing right now, let's say that you're working on the project brief and you still have some unclear definitions you need to work on, list them here. That way we know what are some of the unknowns, some open items, okay, that still need to be defined. And share that when you do your report out, because that will help us understand your assumptions, right? It could be, we're looking to bring in a new piece of equipment, but we haven't done our homework at a detailed level to understand the power requirements. List that out, okay? And so we start to list some things that are still open that we need to find out, which may impact our project. We don't know that right now. Okay? And so I've seen a lot of that, some internal projects, when they don't do proper loading calculations on the electrical or air, specifically air. We're often called in when people have air problems for their equipment. Do they have the right compressors? Do they have sufficient air pressure if the equipment's if you're using air? And so those type of things should be listed. The intent, just like we talked earlier, what we want to do is the rework that happens during a project. We want to list those things so we don't forget them, because here's the other thing, and you want to make it visible so everyone sees it. When a project manager writes it in their notebook, that's great for them. It's not great for the people who have to go find the information, right? And so make sure it's open that people see it, okay? Now, whether it's done, posted on the wall, the old-fashioned way is posting on the wall. We have a lot of our clients that do a lot of that, again, before COVID. Now, with COVID, they've moved more electronically, but make sure that's a place that everyone, the entire team, can see the information. Any questions? So what we're going to do before we actually get started, maybe we should take a quick little break, and everybody back here at 9:25, at which time I will then send you off into your breakout rooms, so you can start working. And then I will there will be a timer that looks like this. Can you see the timer on the screen? Okay, there will be a timer that appears. It's going to be set for 35 minutes when I hit the timer. And then what's going to happen, 2 minutes before the 35 minutes, you're going to get you'll get an email or a notice saying you got 2 minutes before you're going to be dragged back to the main room. All right? Okay, so everybody back by 9:25.
Jess, can you scroll over to the project brief elements so
Sure.
I can just glance at those again? Thank you.